People in our neighborhood still talk about that house at the end of Birch Lane, the one with the chipped white paint and the swing that never moved. They whisper because of the shape of it, always half in shadow, always colder than it should be for summer nights. The truth is, that house held a small girl who learned to keep her voice quiet before she could tie her shoes. Her name was Hannah Cole. When the story begins, Hannah is 12, though she looks younger because worry eats away at children like tooth rot. Her mother, me, worked double shifts, late nights at the diner, mornings scrubbing floors, a woman who learned to trade sleep for rent. Her new husband, Thomas Ward, called himself a provider. To the neighbors, he was a man with a job title and a polite smile. Inside those walls, he was much smaller and meaner. He punished with words that bruised and hands that lingered. He locked Hannah's door at night and told her the world was dangerous, and she was dangerous too, that she couldn't be trusted to stand alone. From the outside, the house looked ordinary. From the inside, the air sometimes smelled like cigarette smoke, sometimes like something that had been burned too long, a stubborn, bitter scent that clung to sheets and hopes. People noticed the bruises when she missed school, and some folks in town said things like, "She'll toughen up. Kids bounce back." But nobody knocked hard enough. Me, exhausted and ashamed, leaned into excuses, stress at work, a fall on the steps, teenage mischief. The lies were a rope the two women tied between themselves and hung over the gulf of truth. Sometimes a rope keeps you together. Sometimes it's the thing that drags you under. Hannah learned silence as an armor. She learned to watch Thomas from the kitchen doorway, counting heartbeats until the breath in the house settled. She learned to fold her life into a small, tight square that could fit in a satchel, a photograph of her mother before the marriage, a pressed paper crane someone at school had made her once, a promise she made to herself in the dark. I will leave. I will make a life so bright he can't find me. At school, Hannah was a phantom, top of the quiz every now and then, invisible the rest of the time. Her teachers called her quiet but bright. The word bright sat like an ember under her ribs. One winter evening, when wind slapped at the windows with the kind of anger only the world gets in January, Thomas pushed too far. He accused me of talking back in front of a customer, accused her of laughing when she shouldn't. He hit her. Hannah heard the crash, the muffled sob that was all too familiar. She ran into the kitchen and slammed a plate to the floor, not from anger but from a need to be seen, to make noise big enough to cover the shouts. Thomas turned like a man woken too quickly, eyes wolfish. "You!" he spit, and the word landed like a slap. That night, me packed a single suitcase. She told Hannah they were leaving. For a heartbeat, the house smelled like a new world. Then Thomas blocked the door. He threw her down the steps. He told Hannah that if she left him, she'd have to watch me leave and never come back. He said things you can't unsay. Me did leave a week later. Or rather, she left and returned and left again, like someone trying to decide whether drowning was preferable to endurance. People in the neighborhood assumed she'd finally had enough. Hannah watched the car lights go and burn out like two stars going supernova. She thought, now it will be worse. She was right. When me left, Thomas's cruelty turned from hydrostatic to strategic. He made Hannah cook and clean, made her call him sir and dad in front of friends. He told lies to the school, told them Hannah needed to be home to help the family. He took things. He took her allowance from a paper route she had started. He took the school books she'd been saving. He told her that any hope she had was a stupid thing sewn into cheap cloth. Most nights, when the house went quiet, Hannah sat on the back steps and mouthed the names of colleges she'd seen in magazines. Names that started with ivory towers and ended with white coats. Hope was a language she kept practicing in whispers. Then the first miracle happened. It came in the form of an old woman in the neighborhood, Mrs. Alvarez, who sold pies and knitted scarves with her arthritic hands. She saw Hannah's hands one November morning, dirty, roughed at the knuckles, stained with grease from an old bike chain, and she noticed the way Hannah flinched when a car backfired. That evening, Mrs. Alvarez invited Hannah to the small community hall for a soup kitchen pickup. There were other people there, neighbors, some charity workers, a man with a camera from a local church. Mrs. Alvarez introduced Hannah as a quiet one with sharp eyes, and something in the way she said the words made people look again. A young teacher from the high school, Ms. Dana Brooks, saw Hannah that night. Ms. Brooks was 30, fierce, and kept a first aid kit in her purse like currency. She saw right through the silence. She started staying after class sometimes, offering extra tutoring. She lent Hannah library books and said plainly, "You should be applying for scholarships. Do you know what those look like?" Hannah nodded, embarrassed. She learned to be careful with questions. Hope attracts attention. Ms. Brooks did something else that didn't feel like grand gesture but changed everything. She started a petition. Not legal, not yet, but a sheet passed at PTA meetings, then to the neighborhood watch. Names, people signed with comments. "Saw the girl with bruises. He yelled at my kid once. She looks hungry sometimes." Another neighbor, Malik, who fixed cars on Maple, choked up in the church basement and left a check. People started talking tickets and donations, and the idea of sponsoring Hannah through school took shape like a puzzle someone finally assembled. It wasn't a single wealthy benefactor or a dramatic courtroom victory. It was dozens of small, human hands folding together into a net. By spring, the community had scraped enough to send Hannah to a boarding program that tutored bright kids at risk. The program was a patchwork of church funds, bake sale money, and scholarships brokered by Ms. Brooks. They said, "We'll keep her safe for now." They packed her into a battered minivan and told Thomas she was going to spend a month at summer camp. He said, "Fine," because he cared little for what other people did to their kids. He cared only for control. At the boarding house, Hannah learned how to sleep without listening for footsteps. She learned how to boil water without burning it. More importantly, she studied. Late nights became her allies. Teachers saw she could parse an anatomy book like someone deciphering a lover's handwriting. Her hands, once used to scrub floors, were nimble and focused. She practiced suturing on synthetic skins, eager to feel mastery instead of fear. When she was 14, a small scholarship fund, put together by neighbors and two generous sponsors who had never met Hannah but cried when they saw her progress report, paid for her to attend a magnet school across state lines. Sponsors wrote letters, some wrote checks, some sent care packages. A retired surgeon, Dr. Elliot Zhang, mailed Hannah a set of surgical textbooks with a note. "If you study them, you can save lives. If you save others, you will save yourself." The words became a talisman. Me watched all this from a distance. At first she was absent, then she began to pick up the phone more often. She would leave messages, fragments of apology and explanation that came out like ghosts. "Hannah, I know I failed you," followed by long silences. Hannah did not answer, not for a long time. There is a particular bitterness in seeing your mother apologize to other people when you are the one who needed the apology, but the community's presence softened her edges. She had tutors, she had advocates in schools, the net kept getting stronger. At the time she left for college at 17, Hannah carried with her something other than a single suitcase. She carried letters of recommendation from principals, a small scholarship, and the kind of cold, tidy ambition that belonged to people who had been given a second chance by strangers. She boarded a plane with the name of a college scrawled on her acceptance letter and a photograph of me tucked into a textbook. A photograph that, even then, made her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. Hope. Rage, both. College was a new kind of war, not of fists, but of expectations. Hannah learned to speak in a lecture hall voice that was precise and unafraid. She learned clinical terms and how to carry gravity in the crease of her brow so patients would trust her. She fell in love with the rhythm of the operating room, the light, the efficiency, the way tiny, precise actions had enormous consequences. Where her hands had once been instruments of survival, they became instruments of benevolence. That transition felt like a rebirth. She was good, better than that, she was relentless. Medical school accepted her with the stoic nod of institutions that respect results. There, Dr. Elliot Zhang paid off a mentor's favor and smoothed a path. He took Hannah under his older, steady wing. He taught her to hold a scalpel without wobble, to see tissue layers like pages of a book. He loved excellence and could be impossibly blunt. "You have to be cruel to be accurate in this field," he told her once, and Hannah only half agreed. She took his words as a sharpening stone. The sponsors from the neighborhood sent letters every now and then. "Proud of you. Come home when you can. We told you so." Each letter was a stitch. Each stitch held her. She wrote back with an economy of affection, short, factual updates because sentiment felt risky. Hannah's mother, me, resurfaced intermittently. She would sometimes show up in the margins of her life. A text on Hannah's birthday, a call after an award announcement, a short, halting visit when Hannah had a surgery demonstration at a nearby hospital. Hannah let her come into small, controlled spaces. She didn't let her back into the kitchen. She listened to me explain herself in a voice that quivered like a rope not quite loosened. "I did what I had to," me would say. "I couldn't keep both of you safe." The sentence never landed entirely. As Hannah rose valedictorian in a lecture hall, chief resident in a program that produced top surgeons, something stewed deep in her. It wasn't hate like a blunt instrument. It was more particular, a ledger of losses she kept in her head. Each entry was precise. Nights she stayed awake listening for footsteps. The summer she had to sell school books to pay rent. The time she couldn't call the police because she had no money and the neighbors were so used to quiet. She cataloged the small betrayals with the same clinical cool she used in the OR. There is a cruelty in economies of memory. You keep only what you need to be justified. The final push to greatness came when Hannah accepted a fellowship at a prestigious hospital in America. The kind with marble lobbies and waiting rooms wrapped in art that didn't look like anything she'd known. People handed her opportunities that had once been impossible, and she took them with the same quiet ferocity she had used to take exams. She specialized in trauma and reconstructive surgery, a field that let her rebuild bodies and, by extension, reclaim agency. Success in medicine is an odd animal. It requires emotional reserves and a temperament that can be alternately cold and incandescent. Hannah could be both, and those who saw her in scrubs watched a woman who stitched with the calm of an astronomer charting constellations. She also cultivated an identity outside the hospital, a polished, luminous persona that appeared at conferences, on panels, in glossy interviews. She learned to wear smiles that were thin, but convincing. She had been made small for so long that being seen as large required practice. Her mother, me, watched from across states when she could. There is a humiliation in watching your child get what you once wanted for yourself, especially when you feel responsible for the thing you failed to protect. Me started working in the same diner that had given her early bread, and she felt an ache like hunger when Hannah's visage appeared in medical journals and on profiles. Sometimes she called. Hannah let 2 rings become a voicemail. There were apologies, always partial and halting. There were explanations, wages too low, fear of Thomas's retaliation, embarrassment, and there were, sometimes, the recognitions that they had both been victims of the marriage's toxicity. But the recognition rarely softened the ledger. Years passed. Hannah saved lives. She taught. She moved into a small penthouse with white walls and an office lined with accolades. She found a small, guarded circle of friends who appreciated her for who she was and for how fiercely she could defend a patient. She had lovers, quiet, discreet relationships that never asked too many personal questions. Her name tag read Dr. Hannah Cole, MD, and the letters felt like armor. Then, as if the past liked to tease the present, Thomas died. The news came via a small, impersonal call. Thomas Ward had been admitted to Brantley Community Hospital after a minor stroke. He was in a ward for people who no longer had means. Me's heart seemed to miss a beat, though the woman had not reconciled with him any more than Hannah had. The town buzzed. Someone told Hannah. It was almost polite to be shocked. The world likes neat moral arcs. The cruel man punished, the broken family healed. Life, as usual, refused to conform. Hannah didn't want to go back. Her life had been a temple of careful distance. But something else, a ledger entry that had sat dormant for years, found sunlight. She went back. Arriving in her old town felt like stepping into a photograph where the colors were both familiar and wrong. Birch Lane had the same maple trees and the same cracked pavement, but all the houses seemed smaller. People stared. They recognized her. The quiet kid now wearing a coat that cost more than their monthly groceries, the surgeon who had won awards they now read about in newspapers. She felt their looks like a tide, washing over hardened spots. When she walked into Brantley Community Hospital, the smell hit her. Disinfectant and old medicines, the particular sadness of places that repair what living has broken. Thomas lay in a bed that did not remember his furies with the kind of reverence he'd expected. He was frail and small. The man who had towered in Hannah's childhood was reduced to a body that ate time. Me hovered at the bedside, hands gripping a plastic cup like a rosary. When she saw Hannah, her face folded into 1,000 small apologies. Hannah, the word came out like something unfinished. Hannah looked at him. Her pulse did not thunder. She was, precisely, a surgeon looking at a patient. She saw his body as a machine gone wrong. She noted the decubitus ulcers, bedsore beginning on his sacrum, the signs of poor care. Nurses shuffled. The doctor on duty blinked. There was logistical cruelty there, a system that is kind to advertisements and cruel to people without money. Hospital rules allow family to visit, to comfort, to sign forms. They do not, as a matter of policy, allow revenge. But life isn't policy-driven, it's human. Hannah moved through the hospital like someone who had rehearsed how to be efficient in pain. She asked the shift nurse for a chart. She reviewed medications, the intake forms, the notes about Thomas being non-compliant. She saw, baldly, that his care was mediocre attention given to acute conditions, not dignity. She saw that the hospital's policies left a man like Thomas exposed. She took out her phone and paged a colleague in the social work department. It would be accurate to say Hannah was cold. It would also be accurate to say she was surgical. She made calls. She spoke to administrators. She checked on the orders for wound care and found them written but not followed. She asked why a man who had survivor's syndrome and no resources was not getting routine turning to prevent bed sores. The nurse offered apologies and shifts of guilt. The administrator, when called, promised, "We'll look into it." Those words had no weight. Me watched this all with the startled grief of someone realizing the child they had left was now their superior in a room where the rules mattered. She tried to touch Hannah's hand. Hannah allowed it briefly, then pulled away. There was a small, bitter dialogue. Me whispered, "I didn't know where to go. I was scared." Hannah looked at her as surgeons look at tissues, identifying, nodding, not softening. Then came the moment that split them. 2 nights later, Hannah came to the hospital again. Thomas had been readmitted with a small infection. The wound had deepened. The chart said that he was hospice eligible. The hospice team had not yet been called. The nurses were stretched thin. This is where systems fail. In the thin twilight where bureaucracy and humanity meet, the thing that matters is who nudges the gears. Hannah asked for the hospice consult to be expedited, and in the same breath, she asked for more aggressive interventions to control the infection. She signed papers that would make her the voice in the room. As a specialist, they listened. No one offered her revenge. This was clinical efficiency. But revenge is not always dramatic. It can be an act of omission disguised as medical procedure or a public, cold refusal. Hannah, careful and composed, chose a form of revenge that fit the ledger she'd kept. She would make her mother feel the consequence of choices she had made by handing her the burden of watching. She did not whisper about it. She drafted a statement of her intent to withdraw extraordinary measures if the hospital recommended against them, and she sat with me as the chart moved from treatable to palliative. She watched me's face fold in ways Hannah had come to recognize as both guilt and relief. The guilt that present mothers feel when the child they failed is now the one in charge, or worse, when the child chooses not to absolve. On the phone in the bright hallway, Hannah called the community sponsors. She told them simply that she couldn't do what they paid her to do. "I can't clean up everything for her," she said. "I can treat Thomas. I can do my job, but I will not be the person who forgives me for making choices that cost me my childhood." Her voice was not a scream. It was a close, inevitable thing. She then made a decision that would become the spine of the story. She informed the hospital social worker that me was, statistically, the next of kin, and that she, Hannah, would be a consulting surgeon, not the one to make hospice decisions. She backed away. She placed, in the hospital file, a carefully worded note about family dynamics and requested strict visitation restrictions for those with a history of abuse when the patient's mental competency was declining. It was the kind of administrative maneuver a surgeon, with a grudge and resources, could make. Me looked at her in the hospice waiting room the day Thomas was moved to palliative care and asked, voice hoarse, "Please, Hannah, forgive me. Help me be here for him." Hannah could have stepped forward. She could have been the daughter who chose mercy. She could have called her sponsors, the neighbors, the old teacher. She could have used her influence to make certain doors opened. She didn't. Instead, she left the hospital at dawn. She left me to stand watch over a man who had once traded safety for cruelty. Hannah walked out into the day with a suitcase in the backseat of her car and the quiet satisfaction of a ledger balanced. She did not gloat. She did not shout. She did not slam the door. She walked around the hospital corridor with neat composure, like a woman who had done a complicated operation and sutured up the wound. Thomas's health declines. Despite the best efforts of hospital staff, nurses providing the hands-on care Me could no longer arrange for alone, his wounds worsen. The infection is stubborn, comorbidities make him fragile. The hospice team, when engaged, is compassionate but constrained. They administer morphine to ease dying, not to hurry it. That is the difference between mercy and malice. Hannah watches charts and updates from afar. She calls in, assesses, and then, as planned, recuses herself when care decisions hinge on family consensus. Me stands by the bed, hollow-eyed, bringing thermoses of weak tea, recalling the smell of the house that used to be. She tells Thomas things she had never said, apologies muttered like prayers, confessions of cowardice. Sometimes he groans, sometimes his eyes flutter. There are neighbors who bring casseroles. Mrs. Alvarez shows up with a pie made for two and sits quietly, offering the kind of presence that isn't a solution but a witness. Then, late one gray afternoon, Thomas stops breathing. The hospice nurse records the time. Me releases a sound that is not a sob, not entirely a cry, a long exhalation of relief and grief. People in the hospital murmur about the arc of life. For many in that ward, death is a visit as common as a weather change. Hannah attends the funeral from a distance. She does not stand in the front row. She watches a tiny, crowded service where the pews are more full of people exchanging glances than of genuine sorrow. Me gives a tremulous eulogy, apologizing and confessing, the language of people trying to compress regrets into minutes. After the service, well-meaning neighbors speak to Hannah with the kind of forgiveness that assumes scars heal with simple words. They say, "She was scared." The phrase hangs like steam. For months, things drift. The community spreads judgment and lets their pity evaporate into gossip. Hannah returns to her work, to surgeries that hum with competence. Her inner ledger, balanced as it is, begins to show a new column, how to live after doing what she did. There are nights when the operation theater's light is too bright. There are days when the kindness of a recovered patient makes her chest ache with something like remorse. She keeps going. Then, in an unexpected technicality, Me develops a medical emergency. An aneurysm in her brain causes a sudden hemorrhage. She is rushed to Brantley Community Hospital, the small place that had watched over Thomas during his end. The ER team fights. The neurosurgical consult suggests they need transport to a tertiary center for a craniotomy. The ambulance's blades whir, and the hospital's corridors strobe with urgent light. Hannah hears no rousing trumpet of fate. She hears a pager, an update on the case. The irony is cruel. The one who had been abandoned in the past has been called back into a system she now leads in some circles. She is on call that night at her own hospital, 2 hours away. She hears the words, "Major bleed, poor prognosis, family at bedside, Me ward daughter present." She breathes and thinks of the ledger. Me lies in a bed at Brantley, intubated, a tangle of monitors and tubes like a confession in plastic form. They call Hannah and say she can come. In the waiting room, the fluorescent lights feel like a witness. A young resident explains the extent of damage, extensive hemorrhage, poor neurological function, the possibility of surgical intervention with slim odds. They ask what the family wants. Me's sister, a woman Hannah had met once at a funeral table, all haggard apologies and casseroles, says simply, "Do everything. Please do everything." Me, if she wakes, will need care and support. The family, leaning into a cultural reflex, asks for maximal intervention. Hannah listens from the threshold. This is the place where mercy and revenge cross like two trains at a junction. Hannah, with her years of holding scalpel and scrub, sees prognosis and probability. She also holds, in a sealed file in her head, the ledger of her childhood. She remembers bedsores, locked doors, nights of silence. She remembers the moment she walked out of Thomas's room and left her mother to stay. Hannah's options are, in practice, simple. She could use her influence to guarantee Me the best transfer and maximal surgical resources. She could sign forms to authorize an intervention that might weigh the scales. She could advocate for palliative care. Or she could do something in between, follow the family's wishes in public, but in the private decisions bend the compass. What she does next is calculated. She moves quickly, contacting a trusted colleague at the tertiary center, a surgeon she knows will fight hard. She arranges a transfer. She signs the paperwork that authorizes an attempt. On the surface, she is the daughter who is doing everything. She is, to everyone watching, heroic. But there's more. She also reads the chart carefully and sees that Me, for months, has had unmanaged diabetes and hypertension, untreated for years. The resident shrugs lack of follow-up, missed appointments. Hannah arranges for the best surgical team, but she sets a condition. No extraordinary measures beyond what the surgical team recommends in the moment of operation. She refuses to sign for indefinite life support. She tells the social worker, calmly and without drama, that if the operation fails, she will not sign forms for continued ventilator support in the absence of meaningful recovery. She believes in dignity and not prolonging suffering. She also knows this choice will return the ledger like a knife. In the operating room, surgeons do what surgeons do. They cut and stitch, fight millimeter by millimeter. The initial operation goes as planned. They evacuate a clot and control intracranial pressure. For a sliver of time, hope flares like a match. The ICU room glows with machines that hum and measure. Family hovers, exhausted and expectant. Then the complications arrive. A severe infection, renal failure, and a cascade of events that push Me's body to its edge. The secondary insults are harsh. The staff fights. Hannah is present in a way only a surgeon can be. She reads labs with the same tenderness a priest reads scripture. She consults specialists and weighs the probability of meaningful recovery. The probability dips into the kind of small decimal points surgeons dread. The life they are prolonging is a body wired to machines and a brain that shows no clear signs of return. Me's eyes remain closed, a small, unfamiliar, childlike pose. Tubes take the place of conversations never said. The family asks, "Do more." The nurses look at Hannah for counsel. The resident, who had never known this particular history, asks the obvious, "What would you do?" The question is blunt. It is also an ethical mirror box. She could be the magnanimous daughter and demand trials of every machine. She could be the cold surgeon and respect the adage that medicine sometimes must refuse to prolong indignity. Hannah's final act is sterile, quiet, efficient. She signs the paperwork to withdraw interventions when medically futile. She refuses to authorize a tracheostomy that might prolong life without recovery. The hospital's ethics team is consulted. The family argues. The public narrative begins to form even before words are said. The daughter who abandoned the mother in her time of need. Me's sister writes messages on social media that spin into rumor. But the hospital only follows clinical protocols and legal thresholds. In the end, the decision aligns with the consensus of the care team. Further aggressive care will not return the person they knew. Me dies within days. People's reactions are immediate and raw. Some call Hannah a monster. Some call her a necessary hand. In the local papers, there are lines that don't bother to understand the calculus of modern medicine and instead reach for a moral simplification. Abandoner turned executioner, they like to say. Mrs. Alvarez cries at the cemetery because she had hoped for at least a quiet reconciliation. Ms. Dana Brooks, who had watched Hannah grow, writes in a private message, "You did what you thought was right." The revenge was not violent. It was pragmatic and cold. It forced me to face the consequences of choices she had made, to be the one up close at the bedside until the end, to sign papers, to watch the machines chart the unreturning lines on a monitor, to be left to the slow tide of grief and to the knowledge that the child she had turned away had not chosen to forgive. After the death, Hannah returns to her life of meticulous surgeries. She is praised in journals for a successful reconstructive program. She wins grants. She gives TEDx talks about resilience and the future of trauma surgery. She continues to receive letters from the people who paid for her schooling. Mrs. Alvarez sends pies. Malik stops by with laughter and a new van. The community that sponsored her continues to love her in the complicated way communities love. Invested, proud, sometimes awkward. But inside Hannah, something fragile has shifted. The ledger that was satisfied now reveals new entries. She is lonely in rooms full of colleagues. She sometimes remembers a little girl on the back steps, counting heartbeats. She sometimes thinks of her mother in the hospital and wonders if there could have been forgiveness that did not require abandonment. She wonders whether her revenge returned her something she did not need as much as she thought, the taste of power. In the end, the moral of her story is not tidy. She had built a life and used her power to make her mother feel the consequence of choices once made. She had chosen justice, not mercy. She had given a kind of retribution that matched the harm in form, absence where there had been presence, a withholding where there had been neglect. She had used the world she had been given and shaped it into a final lesson. Years later, an old neighbor meets Hannah at a medical lecture in the small town's community center. He says, quietly, "You did what you had to do." Hannah looks at him and thinks of Mrs. Alvarez's pie and Mee's hollowed face and the child who learned to be small. She kisses the scars on her hands, those hands that saved and withheld, and walks on. The last scene is not a dramatic courtroom or a cinematic confession. It is a surgeon at 2 a.m., in a hospital that smells of antiseptic and coffee, stitching a child's burned hand back together while a radio plays a soft song. Outside, in the winter wind, Birch Lane is a strip of light. Inside, Hannah sews in a world where mercy and justice are stitches close to one another. She knows which she used, and the knowledge, like a scar, will remain.